DarkSword, the newly discovered iOS exploit kit making global headlines. DarkSword is not a weapon in a video game. It is a sophisticated, professional-grade iPhone hacking tool that has been actively used since at least November 2025 by nation-state actors, commercial surveillance vendors, and now potentially anyone with a web server. What makes this particularly alarming is that in March 2026, an updated version of DarkSword was leaked and publicly posted on GitHub. According to security researchers, this leak means anyone can copy, paste, and deploy it within minutes to hours. Today, we will examine DarkSword through 4 lenses: technical architecture, attack vector and delivery, data theft capabilities, and mitigation and defense. DarkSword is what security researchers call a full-chain iOS exploit. It doesn't rely on a single vulnerability. It chains together 6 distinct vulnerabilities to achieve complete device compromise. Let me break chain. Stage vulnerability component type 1 CVE 2025-30-1277 or CVE 2025-40-3529 JavaScript core WebKit remote code execution. 2 CVE 2000-2026-23,700 dial dynamic bypass as 0 day. 3 CVE 2000-2015-174 Angly GPU process sandbox escape 0 day. 4 CVE 2000-25-43,510 XNU kernel memory corruption. 5 CVE 2000-25-43,500 XNU kernel, VFS, privilege escalation. The attack operates entirely in JavaScript. No native code execution is required until the very final stage. This allows the exploit to bypass Apple's page protection layer, PPL, and secure page table monitor, SPTM, 2 of the most sophisticated security mitigations ever implemented in a consumer operating system. The chain begins when a user visits a malicious web page. The exploit then 1. Achieves remote code execution in Safari's web content process. 2. Escapes the browser sandbox via the GPU process. 3. Bypasses pointer authentication path protections. 4. Escalates to kernel-level privileges. 5. Injects JavaScript implants into system processes like Keychain, iCloud, and Springboard. This is not a simple phishing attack. It requires no user interaction beyond visiting a website. Security researchers have called it a network-based intercontinental ballistic missile for its ability to silently compromise devices at scale. DarkSword is delivered through what security analysts call watering hole attacks. Threat actors compromise legitimate websites, including, in one case, a Ukrainian government website, and inject malicious iframes. When a visitor arrives, the malicious script fingerprints their device. If the target is running iOS 18.4 through 18.7, the exploit chain executes silently. The user sees nothing, no pop-ups, no warnings, no crashes. 3 distinct threat actors have been identified using DarkSword. UNC 6748 unknown affiliation targeted Saudi Arabian users through a Snapchat-themed phishing site, deploying the Ghost Knife backdoor. Pars Defense, a Turkish commercial surveillance vendor, used DarkSword against targets in Turkey and Malaysia, deploying the Ghost Saber backdoor. This campaign showed advanced operational security, using ECDH key exchange to encrypt exploit stages. UNC 6353, a suspected Russian espionage group, deployed DarkSword against Ukrainian targets through compromised websites. Their source code contained comments in Russian, and they have been active through March 2026. What is particularly concerning is that the Russian group left their code unobfuscated on compromised sites. Security researchers noted that anyone can manually collect the parts, deploy them to their own web server, and start infecting phones. The documentation is clear. There's almost no barrier to entry. Once DarkSword compromises a device, it deploys one of 3 JavaScript-based malware families, depending on which threat actor is operating the campaign. Ghost Knife, a JavaScript backdoor capable of exfiltrating signed-in accounts, messages, browser data, location history, and microphone recordings. It communicates with command and control servers using ECDH and AES encryption and actively deletes crash logs to evade detection. Ghost Saber, a more advanced backdoor supporting over 15 commands, including device enumeration, arbitrary SQLite query execution, and file exfiltration. Audio recording and geolocation commands are not fully implemented, suggesting follow-on modules can be downloaded at runtime. DarkSword, a comprehensive data miner attributed to Russian espionage. It extracts iMessages, Telegram, and WhatsApp data, cryptocurrency wallet data, Coinbase, Binance Ledger, Safari history, cookies, and saved passwords, Apple Health database, device keychain, Wi-Fi passwords, credentials, location history, and photos. Unlike traditional spyware, DarkSword does not maintain persistent access. It employs a hit-and-run strategy. It infects the device, rapidly extracts data within seconds or minutes, exfiltrates everything to a remote server, and then deletes its traces. This approach makes detection extremely difficult. There is no persistent malware to find on the device after the attack completes. According to Apple's own data and independent tracking from StatCounter, approximately 25% of all iPhones globally, roughly 270 million devices, are still running iOS 18. This means DarkSword potentially exposes a quarter of the world's iPhone users to silent, zero-click compromise. The affected versions are iOS 18.4 through 18.7. Users on iOS 17 or earlier may be vulnerable to a different exploit kit called Corona, which was disclosed earlier in March 2026 and affects iOS versions back to iOS 13. Apple has confirmed that all 6 vulnerabilities exploited by DarkSword have been patched. The patches were rolled out in the following updates. Most vulnerabilities were fixed in iOS July 3, 18 and iOS 26.2. CVE 2026-20700. The dialed pack bypass was patched in iOS 26.3. On March 11, 2026, Apple also released an emergency update for older devices that cannot run iOS 26. Apple spokesperson Sarah O'Rourke stated, "Keeping software up to date is the single most important measure users can take to maintain the high security of Apple products." Additionally, Lockdown Mode, Apple's extreme security feature designed for high-risk individuals like journalists and activists, blocks these attacks. Google has added all identified DarkSword delivery domains to its safe browsing list, meaning Chrome and Safari users receive warnings before visiting compromised sites. What does DarkSword teach us about mobile security in 2026? First, it demonstrates the proliferation of sophisticated exploit capabilities. Security researchers note there appears to be a secondary market for technically sophisticated exploit chains, where unscrupulous sellers serve buyers with little concern for how they will be used. Second, it shows that zero-day exploits are now being sold to commercial surveillance vendors and criminal groups, not just nation-states. The fact that a Turkish surveillance vendor could deploy the same exploit chain as a suspected Russian espionage group indicates a democratization of capabilities that was previously unimaginable. Third, the leak of this tool onto GitHub represents a dangerous escalation. Security researcher Rocky Cole warned that anyone can manually collect the parts and deploy them to their own web server. The documentation is clear. There's almost no barrier to entry. Finally, it reinforces that software updates are not optional. The users most at risk are those who have delayed updating to iOS 26. In cybersecurity, timing is everything, and staying current is the single most effective defense. DarkSword is not a vulnerability. It is a complete weapon system. It requires no user interaction, leaves no trace, and can be deployed by anyone with basic web hosting knowledge. As Justin Albrecht of Lookout noted, people used to think only journalists, activists, or opposition politicians were targets. Ordinary citizens didn't need to worry. But now we're seeing iOS exploits being distributed through irresponsible brokers, creating a market that puts them in the hands of cybercriminals. The question is no longer whether you are an interesting enough target to be hacked. The question is whether you have updated your phone. If you or someone you know is still running iOS 18, open Settings, navigate to General, and tap Software Update. If you are a high-risk individual, a journalist, activist, executive, or government employee, enable lockdown mode as an additional layer of defense. Are there any questions? Can this affect me if I don't? Safari, DarkSword exploits WebKit, which is the browser engine powering all browsers on iOS. Even if you use Chrome or Firefox on iPhone, they are required by Apple to use WebKit. If you visit a compromised site in any browser on iOS, you are vulnerable. Does restarting my phone remove the infection? Yes and no, because DarkSword uses a hit-and-run approach with no persistent installation. Restarting your phone will clear the malware from memory. However, if the attackers have already exfiltrated your data during that session, the damage is done. How do I know if I've been targeted? For most users, there are no visible signs. Security firms like iVerify and Lookout offer mobile security applications that can detect certain indicators of compromise. However, the cleanest solution is to update to iOS 26.3 or later immediately. Thank you. Stay updated, stay secure. Class dismissed.